So in my last video I was talking about CO2 in a house to regulate propagators and grow tents. And one of the things I was saying is when you have a system like this in the same house where you live in, that the CO2 levels fluctuate. We open doors, but we also close. And when the doors are open, the CO2 levels drop. And when you grow species like, for example, cannabis in a propagator or in a grow tent, and the CO2 levels rises and drops constantly, it's not really efficient, and therefore it's gonna cost you a lot of money and a lot of product. But it's also gonna change the requirement of fertilizers, because when you use CO2, you need more heat, you need more sunlight, so lights, and you need more fertilizer. Because there is no way in the world where you're using CO2 for growing plants, which are fast growing plants, not like these, and you're just introducing a little bit of fertilizer. In my last video I shown the ppm values of CO2 in my house, and it's around the same as last time. So in Europe, but also in the United States or England, ppm between 450 and 1000 is considered a good ventilated house. However, for growing plants inside a grow tent, inside a propagator, you'd rather see something like between 900 and 1500 ppms, and it actually depends on the species that you're growing. So one of the questions I got about growing the plants is, do plants need CO2 at night? And the answer is actually no, because when the plants are living inside a dark area, there's no photosynthesis, and when there's no photosynthesis, there's no absorption of CO2. So introducing CO2 at night really doesn't do anything. We actually know a couple of growers that introduce CO2 throughout the night anyway, but we don't advise it. And one of the reasons is it's gonna increase the expense. CO2 isn't cheap, especially when you buy in dry ice or bottles, or when you use a heater. All of them you have to, well, buy stuff in the form of dry ice, bottles, or gas. And yeah, they're not cheap. So the next thing Practical Prepper asked me is, do I have a recommendation for CO2 equipment for a propagator or grow tent? And one of the recommendations I have is dry ice or a cold system, which means that you're buying those little cartridges or a big one that you can use also for a beer keg. But I do not recommend gas heaters, especially in grow tents or in propagators. It's not only going to produce heat and CO2, but it's also going to increase the amount of humidity. Yeah, it's going to cause you more problems than it's actually going to fix things. And one of the things we talked about on chat is there are also those little buckets with funguses that produce the CO2. And that's great and all, and probably will work for a month or so, but you're also going to introduce a lot of bacteria and funguses in a very closed environment that's very humid, and those spores are going to go everywhere. Don't ask me how I know that, because yeah, we had a failure using a similar system, and we grew mushrooms instead of something else. So I have an eCO2 sensor right there. It measures the amount of CO2, the humidity, and temperature in the grow tent. I had a system that triggers those little cartridges, and it flushes the tent with CO2 upwards to 1200 ppm. However, because I live in the same house where this propagator is, the amount of CO2 inside the grow tent, as you can see, it's around 1000 right now. So there is no need for an injection system indoors, except for the summer. The summer months, most people open up doors, are less inside the house, more likely in a swimming pool or outside. So there's less CO2 inside the house. You can buy those little injection systems on AliExpress or Temu, or you can buy a really big system. Well, obviously for a small tent like this, it's not really efficient. But you can connect it to Home Assistant, and you can trigger it when the CO2 levels are too low. But in the winter months there's no need for it, except for when doors are open. One of the examples I use a lot is this little tiny plant. It's a beautiful plant, it has beautiful leaves, and it's an Alocasia, and it's one of the designer plants. But over here we also have some beautiful Alocasias, and these are grown in an enriched environment with a higher CO2 level. And there are some major differences, because this plant actually has less leaves. It only has 3 leaves. This one has between 5 and 6. And also this one has 3 leaves, but this one has a really big leaf, really big leaves, and you can see the shine and all that stuff. But this one only produces small leaves, and that's the difference between using CO2 and not using CO2. And this is actually the biggest difference between using no CO2 and using CO2. So yeah, there's a big difference, not only in growth but also in bloom and product. The next question, and the obvious question, is how much CO2 do plants need? And this also depends on the plant species. For designer plants, it's between 800 and 1000, so you can grow them in a propagator without the need of extra CO2. For cannabis, it's between 900 and 1500. So at NutriGrow Solutions we have a service tab, it's right over there, and you can press PPFD and DLI calculators. It's a pretty simple tool and it's pretty cool actually. You can select the week, say it's week 7, and it's going to spit out 2 numbers, DLI for normal growth and DLI with CO2. So I'm going to select 31 for with CO2. I'm going to put it right over there, and I'm going to select week 8. You need a tool, it's called a power meter, and it measures the amount of light that a light's producing. So I'm going to select 750 and press calculate. It's going to say how much hours the plants need of light, so in this case about 12 hours, and it's going to say the amount of fertilizer it needs for that specific week, in this case 1.25 grams per liter. It's not going to say the amount of CO2 because it depends on the species and there are too many variables, but it's most likely between 900 and 1500 ppm, so you can find it yourselves. It's pretty easy actually. So it's a very simple tool, and yeah, there's no need for those big V charts or those big PPFD charts. So Loco Joe sent an email and he asked which fertilizer we sell the most in England, because he's from the pepper and tomato communities over there, and obviously we sell a lot of fruit fuel over there. But it works, and we're the patent holder, so nobody else can make it, and the same counts for Pro line. And for the Pro line, it's the most is our hyper, because it hyper stimulates the amount of product that a plant can produce. At NutriGrow Solutions we produce fertilizers. We're a fertilizer company, and we sell 3 main fertilizers. One is very easy, therefore it's called Easy Grow and Easy Bloom. You just throw in potting soil and it works for a couple of months. Next we have our water-based fertilizers, which is the Pro line and the fruit fuel. But the Pro line is very specific because it also works with an enriched CO2 environment. And here's the kicker: a lot of fertilizer companies don't account for the use of CO2. And it's not because they don't want to, but most customers don't use CO2. And it's fairly simple. Why? Because they grow outside in an area where it's constant between 416 and 430 or something like that. But when you grow inside, you need stuff that works and is designed for growing inside. And this channel is called NutriGrow Solutions, and obviously we're going to recommend our own fertilizers. However, our own fertilizers also work with different types of manufacturers. And the reason why is, I know for a fact that a lot of people in England are using a certain brand, but they're using our hyper because it hyper stimulates the amount of product that a plant can produce. So this is one of the products that we sell the most in England. In my last video, but also in this video, I'm going to say exactly the same. It doesn't matter which type of fertilizer you're using, if you're using our brand or somebody else's brand, but you need to select the right type of fertilizer for when you grow outside or when you grow indoors in a grow tent. Otherwise it's not going to perform. After a decade of testing, small scale and large scale, on different types of plants, from peppers and tomatoes, designer plants, and even cannabis, we know for a fact that our fertilizers work, but fertilizers from another company also work. But there's a big difference. All fertilizers are designed for regular or with the introduction of CO2. But it doesn't matter which brand you're selecting, if the amount of light, CO2, the air ratio, so the circulation, and the amount of humidity is not right, it's not going to perform, and it's going to decrease the amount of product that your plants are producing. So I'd rather see people succeed and letting the plants perform to the maximum potential than buying each time different fertilizers and adding a lot of supplements to it to make it perform a little bit better. But when a plant mass is about between 45 and 60% of carbon, yeah, it's the most part is carbon, so why not check the amount of CO2 in the air? And when a plant needs a lot of light, why not check the amount of light that the plant gets, or the humidity, and then select the fertilizer based on the knowledge you have.